Bill O'Brien was recently fired by the Houston Texans after 7 seasons with the team. It's been well documented recently about how bad of a tenure it was and how O'Brien turned a once promising roster into a team that'll most likely finish bottom 10 in the league in 2020. Let's start back in his time at Penn State. O'Brien left the NFL as a previous offensive coordinator for the Patriots to pursue a head coaching career for the Nittany Lions. This was right after the infamous sex abuse scandal at Penn State, so it wasn't the easiest situation to walk into. O'Brien, however, went 8-4 in his first year, being awarded ESPN's National Coach of the Year, and decided to return for another year despite having some offers from NFL teams. After another respectable season at 7-5, O'Brien decided it was time to go back to the NFL and accepted a head coaching job for the Houston Texans. When O'Brien arrived to Houston in 2014's offseason, they were coming off a league worst 2-14 record and a 14-game losing streak after a 2-0 start in 2013. The team had some young talent including DeAndre Hopkins, J.J. Watt, Dwayne Brown, Brandon Brooks, Whitney Merciless, A.J. Boye, DJ Swearinger, and their first overall pick that season, which was Jadeveon Clowney. When O'Brien took over the Texans, it was mostly sunshine and rainbows for the first 3 seasons he was there. They immediately went from 2-14 to 9-7 for the next 3 seasons upon his arrival. Not only did he turn a 2-14 team into a 9-7 team, but they would go on to make the playoffs in 2 of the next 3 seasons. The most impressive part about this 3-year run was the quarterbacks he was doing it with. In 2014, it was Ryan Fitzpatrick, Case Keenum, and Ryan Mallett. In 2015, it was Brian Hoyer, Ryan Mallett, TJ Yates, and even 1 game of Brandon Weeden. In 2016, it was Brock Osweiler for 14 games and 2 games of Tom Savage. You can say what you want, and despite this video being mostly negative surrounding Bill O'Brien, it was very impressive to have 3 straight winning seasons with those guys as your quarterbacks. But now, here's where the bad things start. I'll briefly mention that in 2017, the Texans went 4-12 after their promising first-round pick Deshaun Watson tore his ACL only after 6 starts. 2018 and 2019 were successful regular seasons, but they never got past the divisional round in either appearance. Alright, now the fun part. Where did Bill O'Brien go wrong, and how did he manage to up such a promising team? I would throw in Brock Osweiler signing a 4-year, $72 million deal with the Texans, but there are conflicting reports of whether O'Brien actually wanted him or if it was the GM at the time, Rick Smith. There are stories saying O'Brien wanted Osweiler really badly and some saying he did not want the guy at all, so believe what you want on that one. I will give credit to the Texans for trading out for quarterback Deshaun Watson in 2017's draft, but it was O'Brien that really liked Tom Savage and decided to start him week 1 in the opener against Jacksonville. Let's just say it was unbearably bad and Watson had to come in during the second half. But honestly, I'm not sure how you watch both of those quarterbacks throughout training camp and believe that Tom Savage gives you the better chance to win. Now let's get into some trades and decisions that were actually known to be Bill O'Brien's decisions. The Texans fired their GM Brian Gaine after only 17 months on the job, and after failing to pick up Nick Caserio from the Patriots, it was ultimately Bill O'Brien in charge to make personnel decisions. It started with a couple moves prior to the 2019 season. First, he traded a 3rd-round pick to Cleveland for running back Duke Johnson. Now, this could have been defended if they used Johnson the right way, but they decided to trade a tackle to Kansas City for Carlos Hyde a few weeks later and use him for majority of the carries instead. Hyde and Johnson had decent seasons in Houston in 2019, but there was no need to give up a 3rd-round pick for a backup running back looking back on it. There was the looming contract situation with Jadeveon Clowney, and O'Brien decided to trade the defensive end after declining to sign his franchise tender. Rather than tagging him and trading him like we've seen teams like the Chiefs and Seahawks do recently with Dee Ford and Frank Clark, O'Brien decided to wait it out as long as he could before being forced to sell Clowney for 50 cents on the dollar. Clowney was sent to Seattle in exchange for a 3rd-round pick and linebackers Barkevious Mingo and Jacob Martin. Safe to say they did not get good value in that trade. Another massive trade before the season was the Texans acquiring left tackle Laramie Tunsil from the Dolphins. Miami sent Tunsil and wide receiver Kenny Stills, but received 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick as well. It was a trade that even me myself tried to defend at first, thinking that a franchise left tackle on a competitive team for Deshaun Watson was going to fill a huge void, but in the end, it looks like they gave up way too many assets. For some reason, Houston traded a good left tackle in Dwayne Brown to Seattle in 2017, and when you neglect an important position for so long, sometimes you end up giving up more than you should in a future move. Now time to address the worst of them all, the DeAndre Hopkins trade. This is a trade that didn't need hindsight because none of it made sense from the start. Not only did Hopkins have 3 years left on a manageable contract, but the return did not nearly match the type of player the Texans were giving up. Houston received a second-round pick in 2020, a fourth-round pick in 2021, and running back David Johnson, who was on the decline, and a pretty lucrative contract to his name as well. It's the type of trade that may not have been accepted on Madden franchise mode. That's how bad it was. With the Texans trotting out wide receivers nowhere near the talent of Hopkins, we're seeing the repercussions it has on the Texans offense today. It looks even worse when you look at previous trades for wide receivers that brought back first-round picks in return, and almost none of those players were at Hopkins' level. Hell, even Brandon Cooks was in 2 separate trades that got first-round picks in return. And speaking of Brandon Cooks, that leads us to the last ridiculous trade that shouldn't have been made. After the Hopkins trade, O'Brien made a trade with the Rams for Brandon Cooks himself. Not only did he trade for a guy that had 4 concussions the past couple years, but a guy that was on a very similar contract to DeAndre Hopkins. So maybe you could have argued that O'Brien wanted to save money by unloading Hopkins' contract, but then he trades for a guy with a similar contract and not nearly as good of a player about a month later. To acquire Cooks, the Texans traded a second-round pick in 2020's draft, 57th overall, and I bet the Rams were thrilled to get that contract off their books. Cooks has been off to a very slow start with the Texans, and to the surprise of no one, Hopkins is thriving and continuing to be a top 3 receiver in the league in Arizona. Now that the trades were touched on, I couldn't end this video without talking about the coaching debacle that we saw last January in Arrowhead by Bill O'Brien himself. The most obvious coaching blunder in that game was the fake punt he ran up 24-7 in his own territory. As we know, they didn't convert, giving the Chiefs a very short field, and they ended up losing the game 51-31. Not only was it a terrible decision to go for, but there was a decision to kick a field goal on 4th and 1 on the Chiefs' 13-yard line, and O'Brien later admitted that he was not aware it was 4th down and didn't have a play he liked in that spot. Of course, there were many other bad coaching decisions throughout his career, but in a big spot in the divisional round of the playoffs, that was as bad as it can get. Well, now the Texans are free of Bill O'Brien, but they'll still feel the effects of him in next year's draft, where they don't own their own first or second round picks, which were used in the Laramie Tunsil and Brandon Cooks trades. We'll see what the Texans decide to do with their front office and head coaching position in the offseason, but hopefully for Texans fans, they learned what not to do after the Bill O'Brien experience.